The fact is, it can be measured in hundreds of billions of dollars of opportunity that we have not, as a country, fully taken advantage of. And by deepening our relationships, by making it simpler to do business in Ireland, in Europe, we create enormous opportunity for Canadian jobs. I will just underscore two recent examples. One, OpenText, 2 days ago, 100 million investment here, which ultimately benefits a great Canadian company in integration. And then the $18 billion purchase of Airbus planes manufactured in Quebec. That's because of our fluid relationship with Europe, our seamless relationship with Europe, that we can be that competitive in it. And there are many, many more examples of that.
Canada may have just made one of its biggest trade moves in years, and it could change who holds the power. As Ottawa looks beyond Washington for new partners, the United States risks losing influence, while Canada gains more options, more leverage, and more control over its future. In June 2026, 2 days before the G7 summit in Kananaskis, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood in Dublin alongside Irish Taoiseach Michel Martin and said something that landed differently than any prior diplomatic statement about Canada's trade strategy. He did not say it quietly in a bilateral communique. He said it at a press conference in the country that will assume the presidency of the Council of the European Union on July 1st, the same date as Canada's CUSMA review deadline with Washington, with explicit language about what dependence on a single trading partner has cost Canada and where Canada intends to go instead. The audience was Irish. The message was global. The formal framework Carney and Martin agreed on June 13th builds on a joint statement signed between the two governments in September 2025. The June framework covers 8 categories of structured bilateral cooperation: trade and investment, life sciences and biomanufacturing, food security and agri-food systems, climate and clean growth, research and innovation, international security and defense, Canada-EU cooperation, and cultural cooperation. Each category contains specific documented commitments, not aspirational language, but defined action items with named programs, institutional partnerships, and agreed timelines. The trade and investment commitments are the most commercially significant. Official Canadian figures show Ireland now ranks as the 8th largest investor in Canada. Canada ranks as the 14th largest investor in Ireland. Canadian companies employ 26,000 people in Ireland. Irish companies employ more than 30,000 people in Canada. The two governments committed to maximizing the opportunities under CETA, the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, and to marking its 10th anniversary, signed October 30th, 2016, during Ireland's Council presidency. Ireland's progress toward ratifying CETA domestically was welcomed in the joint statement. Ireland serves, in the framework's own language, as a trusted gateway for Canadian companies seeking to access, invest in, and scale across the European Union. The EU market behind that gateway is the context that frames everything Carney said about diversification. During the press conference, he addressed critics who questioned why he was traveling to Europe while Canadian workers faced job losses from American tariffs. His answer was direct and numerical. The European Union is a market of over 400 million wealthy consumers. Canadian businesses have barely penetrated it relative to what the market size and purchasing power could absorb. The gap between what Canada currently exports to Europe and what the EU market could theoretically receive from Canadian producers is, in Carney's framing, it's not a theoretical future opportunity. It is the specific vulnerability that dependence on the American market has allowed to persist for a generation. The Ireland visit produced a specific example of the kind of commercial outcome Canadian diversification can generate when it moves from policy to transaction. An $18 billion contract for Airbus aircraft assembled in Quebec, the largest aerospace procurement in Canadian history, was cited by Carney as evidence that European industrial cooperation produces real economic activity rather than framework agreements that sit on shelves. Quebec workers assembling European-designed aircraft for an international market is a concrete demonstration that Canada-EU industrial partnerships are commercially viable at scale. The artificial intelligence dimension of Carney's Dublin remarks addresses a vulnerability that most trade policy analysis has not yet fully integrated into the diversification discussion. Recent actions by the United States have included blocking foreign nationals from accessing certain advanced American AI models, restrictions that affect Canadian researchers, Canadian companies, and Canadian government institutions attempting to use frontier AI systems developed by American firms. Carney warned against global over-reliance on a single technology ecosystem, arguing that Canada, France, and the EU must collaborate to build redundancy and diversification into global AI infrastructure, rather than depending on a single country for the critical technology layers that increasingly underpin every sector of the modern economy. The Canada-Ireland Joint Framework directly operationalizes that AI sovereignty concern. The two governments committed to strengthening cooperation on responsible AI development, including establishing institutional linkages between Canada's Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute and Ireland's AI Office to advance research, collaboration, information sharing, and the development of AI systems grounded in shared democratic values. That is not a symbolic gesture. It is a documented institutional channel for AI governance cooperation between two countries whose combined connection to the European AI regulatory framework. Ireland hosts the European headquarters of many of the world's largest technology companies, creates real leverage over how AI systems are governed globally. The defense and security dimension of the Dublin visit connects Canada's economic diversification strategy to its military and intelligence posture in ways that are now inseparable. Canada is currently the only non-European country participating in the EU Security Action for Europe SAFE instrument, the framework that gives Canadian defense firms access to joint European procurement programs and the $150 billion Rearm Europe Fund. The joint framework signed June 13th adds to that. Annual consultations between foreign ministries, enhanced practical cooperation between the Canadian Armed Forces and the Irish Defence Forces in maritime security training, and a specific commitment to working together to advance Ukraine support and Middle East stability through aligned multilateral positions. Carney's attendance at the European Political Community Summit on May 4th, 2026 in Yerevan, Armenia, the first time a non-European leader has participated in that forum, preceded the Dublin visit and reflects the same strategic posture. Canada is being welcomed into European security and diplomatic frameworks that historically have been reserved for EU member states and their immediate neighbors. Ireland's Council presidency, beginning July 1st, provides the specific institutional vehicle for advancing the Canada-EU strategic partnership of the future, the broader framework within which the Canada-Ireland bilateral commitments sit. Canada has built this whole economic system around one massive relationship, one massive trading partner, Carney told the Dublin press conference, describing the dependence that decades of North American integration produced. The vulnerability that arrangement created became visible the moment the other party decided to use tariffs as leverage. The CETA anniversary, the Irish Council presidency, the SAFE membership, the Airbus contract, the AI Safety Institute linkage, and the 26,000 Canadian jobs on Irish soil, all of it is the infrastructure of the alternative Canada is building, while Washington and Ottawa negotiate the CUSMA review with 17 days remaining on the July 1st clock. The timing of the Dublin visit relative to the July 1st CUSMA deadline is not coincidental. Canada did not travel to Ireland in the middle of the most consequential trade negotiation in a generation because the schedule happened to align. It traveled to Ireland because arriving at the G7 summit in Kananaskis 2 days later, having just signed a bilateral cooperation framework with the country holding the EU Council presidency, and having stood publicly in Dublin to describe American trade policy as a structural vulnerability, Canada is actively correcting, sends a specific message to every government at that table. Canada is not waiting for CUSMA to resolve before building alternatives. It is building alternatives while CUSMA negotiations proceed and the two tracks are deliberately visible to each other. A Canada that has signed defense cooperation with the EU through SAFE, secured an $18 billion Airbus contract for Quebec workers, established AI governance channels with Ireland, and publicly identified dependence on a single trading partner as a national security risk, is a Canada negotiating from a different position than one that has done none of those things. Carney said as much in Dublin. The framework signed June 13th is the evidence supporting the argument.